There are Christians who take a fundamentalist, literal approach to their understanding of the Bible. They believe, for example, that the earth was created in 6 literal days, and that all humans descended from a first created couple called Adam and Eve, and then from Noah and his 3 sons and their wives after a flood that killed nearly all terrestrial life on earth. And then there are Christians who take another approach, believing that these accounts aren't true in the literal sense. Their reasoning is often something to the effect that God was using the cosmology and mythology familiar to the Israelites and early Christians at the time to communicate with them. They may also use the same reasoning when discussing the commands recorded in the Bible, perhaps saying that criticism of some of their practices would be culturally insensitive. For clarity, I am an atheist. I don't believe in the Christian God or any God, and so I do not believe that the Bible is divinely inspired. However, I used to be Christian, specifically the former literalist kind. In this video, I am sharing the thoughts that come to mind when I hear the reasoning of the second kind of Christian. I think that this belief makes God out to be a liar and an evil entity. In respecting the Israelite culture, this version of God will end up lacking respect for human life. So let's set some foundation. I'm granting in this video that God inspired the Bible.
All scripture is given by inspiration of God,
meaning he had a direct influence on how its words were pulled together and what it says. Taking this to be the case, what would the Bible say about this God? All sources cited will be linked to the video description. Also, I need to say that there will be references to sensitive topics, so please be careful if such things will be triggering to you. I'll give another warning later in the video. I'm not going to go too deep into how incorrect the literal interpretation of the Bible's accounts of creation and the flood will be in light of what we know about the world. But suffice it to say that based on the knowledge we as a species have gained about the world, and indeed the universe, it is impossible for the creation and flood accounts to be literally true. Genesis presents a cosmology that was not unlike that of many others of the day. The cosmos was believed to be a flat world with a firmament, hard surface, keeping celestial waters from falling down on the earth.
And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament.
Unless you're a flat earther, you know that this isn't how the world is. There is no firmament above us that is keeping primordial waters back. And that is most definitely the context in which these people would have viewed the firmament. The Babylonians believed in this dome surface, and the Egyptians probably believed in an iron firmament. Next, the flood narrative states that all human beings except for 8, Noah, his sons, and their wives, were killed in a worldwide deluge. It also says that the flood killed almost all land animals too, except those in the wooden vessel that Noah was to have made. I've heard it argued that this was just a local flood and that it wasn't the whole world that was wiped out. But the Bible then goes on to present a genealogy of humanity, stating how the nations of the world descended from the sons of Noah. It's clear that the flood was meant to represent a flood of the entire world. This is filled with all kinds of problems. First, there is no historical or genetic evidence for such a bottleneck, with all of humankind exploding from one family in the Near East. All that we know about history does not even hint at that being the origin of all civilization. And then there's the idea of the minimum viable population, MVP. You see, a population needs a certain amount of genetic variation in order to thrive. Below this point, genetic disease and other issues make survival very hard. That's why inbreeding caused health issues for European and other royal families. In other words, there is absolutely no way that these two accounts could describe actual events. Our world does not look like the world the Bible's God created. The Earth's human population clearly did not descend from a single human family. A God who created the world and who influenced it in the ways the Bible claims this God did would know all this. And yet he either told the Israelites these incorrect stories or he let them believe them. In either case, he's a liar. Now, why is this important? Well, to me, it would make God hard to trust. Or at the very least, it would mean that I couldn't know whether his word is figurative or literal at any given time. I mean, there are literal genealogies in the Bible, meticulous lists of people, mostly men, who went on to populate cities that the people who would have been reading or hearing these accounts would know. Take, for example, Nimrod, who built the cities of Nineveh and Calah, as told in Genesis 10, verse 10. The problem is that Nineveh was founded around 6000 BCE and Calah around 1200 BCE. Considering this is a post-flood account of how the world was repopulated, it's pretty clear that this is supposed to be the explanation for how the civilization started. But there is no way that Nimrod could have built these cities unless he lived a very long time. So if all scripture is inspired and God-breathed and can be trusted, in what way is it to be trusted? Personally, I would think that a scripture produced by the people of the one true God would be the closest thing to truth among anything you could possibly find in antiquity. The more archaeologists dig up and the more historians discover, the more these accounts should be verified as truth. But that's not what we're finding. I think I've heard people say that God catered to the culture of the time in order to teach them greater spiritual truth. But if you have to twist and bend the truth in order to teach the truth, then of what value is the truth? For that matter, how true can this truth be? I mean, today, lots of Christians understand that the world is billions of years old and still believe in God and His truth. If this God person exists, He could have provided the sons of Israel with the truth of how the world works and came to be, could have had them be ahead of their time, could have had them be the center of not only spiritual understanding, but scientific, and could have shown just how the world that they lived in was a reflection of His glory, His truth. I mean, it's the least God could do, and it wouldn't take any effort on His part. Any parent who loves their children tells them how the world works. Birds lay eggs, plants grow from seeds. Couldn't God, who knows infinitely more, do the same? Just imagine a University of Jerusalem, maybe a short distance from the temple, where scholars from all over the known world would go to learn information about the way things work, just as the Queen of Sheba went to visit King Solomon for his wisdom. Instead, what we have is a book that tells fables reminiscent of the times, fables that believers, such as I was, interpret as literal truth because they believe their God would never lie to them. But He did, didn't He? In this section, there will be references to slavery, as well as physical and sexual assault. Please take care of yourself and turn away now if this is triggering to you. The Bible is full of stories and even God-breathed laws that repulse even many Christians today. Many of the very Christians who believe that God used the figurative language and culture of the day to communicate with ancient Israel see these too as God being a respecter of the Israelite and wider Near East culture. But what ends up happening is that God seems to me like He sees this culture as more important than the people He claims to love. Let's take slavery, for example. There is absolutely nothing in the Bible that I found that states that slavery should not be practiced. Instead, what I find is laws regulating it. For example, the enslaved could be inherited like any other property, as Leviticus 25 verse 46 says. And Exodus 21 verse 21 says there is no punishment for beating the enslaved, so long as he recovers in a couple days, because the slave is the owner's property. Yes, there are certain protections awarded to the enslaved. For example, Exodus 21 verses 26 and 27 says that an enslaver must free their enslaved if they damage the enslaved's eye or knocks out a tooth. But I should remind you that there have been rights afforded to the enslaved in the Americas during chattel slavery too. But just because there were some rights afforded to the enslaved before the emancipation in the West, doesn't mean slavery was a just system. Slavery, including the slavery that God allowed and regulated in the laws of Israel, is unjust. In fact, the law God presented to Israel says in Leviticus 25 verse 46 that while foreigners could be enslaved permanently, fellow Israelites were not to be enslaved permanently. That's an unjust system if I've ever heard of one. Not one that I would expect from a perfectly moral God who's all about love. And then there's the way God says sexual assault should be dealt with. There's an account in Numbers 31 of the people of Israel taking revenge on a nation called Midian for seducing them into sin, as recorded in Numbers 25. The punishment? They were to wipe out the Midianites and take everything they own. As for the virgin girls,
But all the women and children that have not known a man by lying with him, keep alive for yourselves.
maybe I lack imagination, but I don't see how this could be interpreted any other way but as forced marriages or sex slaves. As someone who went through forced marriage stated,
when you don't consent willingly to be with someone, then even if you acquiesce to their requests, it doesn't make it a yes. It makes it a I want to survive today.
how much worse would it be for these young girls who had these men kill their mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, and rob them of everything they had? And then there's the issue of marriage. Israelite culture, and thus the law that God is recorded as establishing, makes a big deal about female virginity. In fact, a man could turn his wife away for not being a virgin. And the evidence of this lack of virginity? Well, I think it's clear that it is supposed to be something that is proven after the first sexual encounter of their marriage, namely, blood on the bed sheets. However,
what is a hymen? Hymen is a ring of tissue that is just inside the vaginal vault. It serves as a barrier to infection and urine and feces when you are a baby. So past toddler age, this doesn't have a purpose. It is not a chastity thing. It doesn't have to do with sex, period. And it also has no correlation to whether someone has had sex. It has historically been referred to as popping a cherry or blood on the bed sheets after the wedding.
the God who made human anatomy would know that. He would know that not all first-time sexual encounters result in vaginal bleeding. Imagine, you as a woman get married, and your new husband turns you away for not being a virgin, when he literally has no actual evidence. Especially when the accusation can result in you being stoned to death. Think about this. Deuteronomy 22 verse 21 says, a woman should be stoned to death for not being a virgin on her wedding night. That's bad enough. But the woman's body is being monitored and policed in this way, with no corresponding policing for the man's body. The funny thing is that the rest of the chapter presents blood on the bed sheets as empowerment for the woman to defend against accusations of non-virginity. Why didn't God tell Israel how incorrect all of this is? For the sake of the women who might suffer just because of incorrect anatomical knowledge that God is supposed to know and could easily correct. So, by allowing these things to be codified into law and recorded for posterity, the all-knowing creator of the universe makes himself seem to be nothing more than a moral monster. To think he would care more about the culture of the Israelites and the Near East than he did for the enslaved and the daughters of Israel. Honestly, there is no way that God can come away looking like someone worthy of love, praise, and worship in light of all this. If the God of the Bible exists, then he lied to his people, directly or by omission, and he didn't have to. He let them believe and practice things that would only be harmful to the most vulnerable people within the population. In respecting culture, he disrespected human life, and that's putting it lightly.